Welcome to Karen's HOA Nightmares. Get ready for the most outrageous, shocking, and downright hilarious tales from the world of homeowners associations. In today's story, after 2 long years of a long-distance marriage, Kenny Patrick, a decorated military officer, finally returned home to reunite with her husband, Alex, in their peaceful neighborhood on Pinewood Drive. But their dream homecoming quickly turned into a nightmare, thanks to their self-appointed neighborhood enforcer, Gina Felix. As an HOA compliance officer, Gina had a reputation for terrorizing the neighborhood. But she had no idea who she was messing with when she targeted Kenny for suspicious behavior. Little did Gina know that the woman she accused of faking her military status was an actual colonel in the United States Army. As Gina's harassment escalated, Kenny and Alex found themselves not only defending their home, but also fighting back against the manipulative power of their neighbor. But when a new neighbor, Ruby Johnson, moved in next door to Gina, things began to take an unexpected turn, and Gina's reign of terror was about to be turned upside down. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments and keep up with our latest hot stories. "I'm calling the police right now!" My HOA neighbor Gina Felix shouted at my wife the day she moved in, already dialing 911. "Suspicious military vehicle. Possible stolen valor," she reported with obvious satisfaction. Less than an hour later, 2 police officers showed up at our door because this self-appointed neighborhood enforcer thought she could humiliate us. What she didn't realize was who she was accusing. I watched her expression change from smug certainty to complete fear when my wife, Kenny, calmly reached into her wallet. What Kenny pulled out turned the whole situation on its head. After 2 long years of a long-distance marriage, Kenny was finally coming home. I had the house perfectly arranged. The neighborhood was peaceful, and I was excited about this being the happiest day of my life. But I was wrong. There was one thing I hadn't prepared for. Gina Felix, who lived 3 houses down, was about to turn our dream into a nightmare. The sound of the military truck rumbling down Pinewood Drive still sends chills down my spine. I was standing by the window, checking my watch every few minutes like an excited teenager. The house was spotless, fresh flowers on the dining table, and a welcome home banner hung proudly on the porch. Everything had to be perfect for Kenny's return. After months of video calls and stolen weekends, we were finally going to be together. I couldn't stop grinning as I watched that big olive green truck pull into our driveway. Kenny stepped out, walking with the confidence that only comes from 8 years of military service. She was tall, athletic, and moved with purpose. Every step was efficient. When she hugged me, I felt like I could do anything, but I noticed her eyes scanning the area, even as she smiled. "Old habits from my deployments," she would always say. But the alertness in her posture was something I'd learned to recognize. It was part of what made her such an exceptional officer, and it would prove crucial in the days ahead. That's when the storm arrived in the form of a middle-aged woman in a pink bathrobe. The sound of Gina Felix's front door slamming shut echoed down the street. She marched toward us, already on her phone, her eyes locked on our military truck. I had seen Gina around the neighborhood before. Always impeccably dressed, always carrying a clipboard, always finding something to complain about. But I had never seen her move with such purpose. She speed-walked toward us, taking photos with her phone from different angles like a reporter on a mission. Gina's approach was theatrical. She immediately posted in the neighborhood group chat, typing, "Military invasion of our peaceful community." Her fingers flew over her phone as she documented everything. Then she made her grand entrance. "Excuse me," her voice cut through the air. "I'm Gina Felix, HOA compliance officer. That vehicle is in direct violation of Section 3B of our community guidelines. No commercial vehicles can park on residential streets for more than 30 minutes. She didn't even introduce herself properly, just jumped straight to the attack. I tried to explain, keeping my voice calm. "Ma'am, this is my wife, Kenny. She's just moving her things from base housing." But Gina cut me off with sharp precision. "I don't care who she claims to be. Rules are rules. And by the way, I've checked the military databases. There's no record of any active-duty personnel at this address." Kenny's reaction was intriguing. While I was getting flustered, she stayed completely calm, almost amused by Gina's antics. She didn't immediately speak. She just observed, studying Gina's behavior. I could practically see her processing every detail. Her silence made Gina even more uncomfortable than any rebuttal could. "This neighborhood has standards," Gina raised her voice, drawing the attention of more neighbors. She was feeding off the growing audience. "I've maintained property values here for 12 years. I won't let some fake army wife and her pushover husband destroy what I've built." The words "fake army wife" made my blood boil, but Kenny just tilted her head slightly as if Gina had said something mildly interesting. Gina was pulling out all the stops now, positioning herself like a prosecutor making her case. She called the HOA hotline right there on our driveway, speaking loudly enough for the entire street to hear. Emergency violation in progress, military vehicle, possible fraud situation. Then she went on with her speech, listing her neighborhood victories proudly. "I've handled 6 other problem families in this community," she bragged. "The Johnsons moved after 3 months of proper enforcement." She rattled off her accomplishments, like a soldier counting victories in a war. "I am the law in this neighborhood." She was trying to establish dominance, to make it clear that resistance was futile. Gina had built her entire identity on being the self-appointed ruler of Pinewood Drive. She was basking in the attention, her voice getting louder with each curious face that appeared. Finally, Kenny spoke, her voice steady and confident. "Ma'am, you seem very thorough. Tell me, do you know what real authority looks like?" Her words hung in the air, delivered with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from truly holding power, not just pretending to wield it. Gina scoffed. "Honey, I've been dealing with troublemakers since before you were born. This is my neighborhood, and these are my rules." Kenny's smile grew slightly, almost predatory. "I'm sure you have been dealing with troublemakers. Very interesting." Gina stormed off toward her house, but not before turning back and shouting loud enough for the entire street to hear. "Tomorrow morning, I'm calling the police. We'll see how fake your military story is." She thought she had all the power, but Kenny quietly pulled out her phone and snapped a picture of Gina mid-rant. "Evidence, sweetheart," Kenny said, her tone simple yet loaded with meaning. "Always collect evidence." It made me realize that Kenny, who had commanded troops in combat zones, was already 3 steps ahead of Gina Felix. What if our new neighbors decided we really were troublemakers? The thoughts spiraled through my mind as I watched Kenny calmly putting on her shoes, completely unfazed by the police presence outside our door. My voice was cracking despite my efforts to stay calm when we stepped outside. "Officers, we've done nothing wrong." I managed to say that truck was a scheduled pickup. "My wife is a legitimate military personnel." But Gina interrupted before I could finish. "He can't even prove it. Show them documents. Show them anything that proves you're not just pretending to be soldiers." Chief Johnson stepped forward with professional courtesy, but his request sent ice through my veins. "Ma'am, we're going to need to see identification from both of you." This was it, the moment Gina had been building toward. I fumbled for my wallet, but all eyes were on Kenny. She moved with deliberate precision, reaching for her back pocket slowly, calmly, like she had all the time in the world. The crowd held its collective breath. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. You could hear the leather creak as she opened her wallet, the soft rustle of papers being sorted. Then she withdrew a single card and held it up to catch the morning sunlight. The military ID gleamed like a beacon, the silver eagle practically glowing in the light. "Colonel Kenny Patrick, United States Army." The silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a pin drop on concrete. Gina's transformation was a masterpiece of human emotion, frozen in time. Second one, her confident smile was still plastered across her face, completely intact. Second two, her eyes focused on the ID card, trying to process what she was seeing. The second 3, the smile began to waver as understanding crept in. The second 4, her jaw started to drop almost in slow motion. Second 5, the color drained from her face like someone had pulled a plug. Second 6 through 10, complete stone statue mode. She stood there like a mannequin, mouth hanging open, eyes wide with shock. I'd never seen someone literally freeze in place before. It was like watching a computer crash in real time. The woman who'd been so confident in her authority, so certain of her righteousness, had just discovered she'd called the police on a colonel in the United States Army. Chief Johnson's reaction was immediate and dramatic. His entire posture changed as he recognized the rank and credentials. "Colonel Patrick, my sincere apologies, ma'am. Had I known we were dealing with military personnel of your caliber." Both officers snapped to attention with crisp military bearing, offering sharp salutes that spoke of deep respect for Kenny's rank and service. The contrast with Gina's continued frozen state was almost comical. Here were actual law enforcement officers showing proper deference to real authority, while the self-appointed neighborhood police chief stood paralyzed by her own miscalculation. Officer Thompson looked genuinely embarrassed as he lowered his salute. "Should we file a report about false emergency calls, Chief?" he asked quietly. The implications were clear. Gina had wasted valuable police resources on a bogus complaint. The crowd's reaction rippled through the gathered neighbors like a shockwave. "Holy crap, did you see that?" whispered someone behind me. "Gina just called the cops on a colonel," gasped another voice. "Is she completely insane?" The murmurs grew louder as the reality of the situation sank in. Gina Felix, the woman who'd appointed herself judge and jury of the neighborhood, had just publicly humiliated herself in the most spectacular way possible. She tried to recover, stammering something about fake identification and military people being capable of deception. But her voice had lost all its earlier authority. Chief Johnson shut down her protests with professional firmness. "Ma'am, this is legitimate federal identification. I strongly suggest you reconsider the nature of your complaints." Officer Thompson's embarrassment was visible as he processed the situation. Here he was, a young officer trying to build his reputation, having responded to what was essentially a harassment call disguised as a legitimate complaint. The body language of both officers had shifted dramatically from cautious authority to respectful deference. Chief Johnson, clearly a veteran of dealing with neighborhood disputes, seemed almost relieved to encounter a situation where the actual facts were so clear-cut. His years of experience had taught him to recognize the difference between genuine concerns and petty vendettas, and this situation clearly fell into the latter category. Kenny, meanwhile, handled the situation with the grace of someone who dealt with much more serious conflicts. "Officers, no harm done. Thank you for your professionalism and service." As the police prepared to leave, Chief Johnson made a comment that would prove prophetic. He spoke quietly to Officer Thompson, but his words carried clearly in the morning air. "Make a note about this address and keep an eye on Felix. People like her don't stop." Gina heard every word, and I watched her face go from red with embarrassment to white with sudden fear. She'd gone from being the authority figure to being the one under scrutiny. The tables hadn't just turned. They'd been completely flipped over. As the squad cars pulled away, Gina stumbled back toward her house like a zombie. Her earlier confidence shattered into a million pieces. But what did Johnson mean by keep an eye on Felix? Do you think Gina will back down now or double down? Let me know what you think. For 3 days after the police incident, Gina Felix's house remained ominously quiet. No pacing on the front porch, no phone calls loud enough to wake the dead, no clipboard-wielding patrols of the neighborhood. The silence should have been comforting, but somehow it felt more threatening than her previous theatrics. I could see her shadow moving behind her closed curtains, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. Through our bedroom window, I watched her silhouette at her computer desk for hours at a time, the glow of her monitor casting eerie patterns on her walls. She was planning something. When someone like Gina Felix goes quiet, it's not because they've given up. It's because they're regrouping. "How dare they embarrass me?" I could almost hear her thinking from 3 houses away. 20 years in this neighborhood. No one makes Gina Felix look like a fool and gets away with it. What I didn't know at the time was that Gina was conducting her own version of military intelligence gathering. She'd spent those 3 days researching everything from military complaint procedures to challenging officer authority to reporting military misconduct. Her computer search history would have been fascinating and terrifying to examine. She was looking for any angle, any weakness, any bureaucratic loophole that could be exploited. Fine. She must have decided sometime during that 3rd day of plotting. If she wants to play the military card, I'll show her what real power looks like. I still have connections. I still have influence. And I'm about to unleash both of them on these troublemakers. The woman who'd built her entire identity around controlling others wasn't about to let one setback destroy her carefully constructed kingdom. What made Gina's retaliation particularly devastating was her systematic approach. She didn't just fire random violations at us. She'd clearly studied our routines, our schedules, our habits. She knew exactly when we left for work, when we returned, and when we had visitors. Every citation was precisely timed to cause maximum disruption. The morning violations would arrive just as I was rushing to leave for important meetings. The evening citations would be waiting when Kenny returned from her runs, still sweating and tired. Gina had weaponized bureaucracy with the precision of a military operation, except her war was against innocent civilians. The counterattack began on day 4, and it was nothing short of breathtaking in its scope and vindictiveness. I came home from work to find 4 official violation notices taped to our front door like some kind of bureaucratic declaration of war. Excessive noise complaint, 6:15 a.m. Disturbance documented by multiple witnesses, read the first one, apparently referring to Kenny's morning workout routine. Vehicle positioning violation. Personal automobile extends 2.3 in beyond approved property line, declared the second. Targeting my car that I'd parked the same way for months without incident. Unauthorized signage display. Welcome home banner installed without proper HOA approval, stated the third. Attacking the decoration I'd hung with such joy just days earlier. Landscaping noncompliance. Hedge height exceeds 42 in maximum by approximately 1 in. They climbed the fourth, targeting bushes that had been professionally trimmed just 2 weeks ago. But Gina was just getting started. Day 5 brought 6 additional violations, each more ridiculous than the last. Trash receptacle placement error. Bins positioned 14 hours before authorized pickup time. Apparently, putting out garbage the night before collection was now a crime. Exterior lighting violation. Porch light luminosity exceeds community standards. Our standard 40W bulb was suddenly too bright. Paint color discrepancy. Front door shade not pre-approved by architectural committee. The blue door that had been there when we bought the house was retroactively problematic. Package delivery disruption. Amazon truck temporarily blocked neighbor's view of street because apparently we were responsible for delivery vehicle placement. Pet noise complaint. Excessive barking. Disturbing community peace. We didn't even own a pet. Suspicious gathering violation. More than 3 people observed on property simultaneously. The pizza delivery guy, Kenny, and I had apparently constituted an illegal assembly. Each violation carried an $85 fine, and Gina had managed to rack up 10 of them in just 2 days. $850 for completely fabricated infractions. The financial pressure was clearly calculated to force compliance through economic warfare, but the monetary attacks were just the beginning of Gina's sophisticated harassment campaign. She began following Kenny during her morning runs, documenting the every step with her phone camera like some kind of fitness paparazzi. She positioned her car to block our driveway exit, forcing me to ask her to move every time I needed to leave for work. Her dog, a small yappy creature that had never shown interest in our yard before, was suddenly being walked exclusively on our lawn, where it was encouraged to leave itself without cleanup. At exactly 11 p.m. each night, loud music would begin blasting from Gina's house, stopping precisely at 10:59, just 1 minute before the noise ordinance took effect. The psychological warfare escalated beyond simple rule violations into something approaching stalking behavior. Gina would stand in her yard for hours staring at our house with the intensity of a surveillance operative. She took flash photos through our windows at night, claiming she was documenting suspicious activity to anyone who asked. Passive-aggressive notes began appearing on our car windshield. Some people think rules don't apply to them, and community standards exist for a reason, and true neighbors respect property values. She created a concerned neighbors message group that included everyone on the street except us, spreading rumors and building sentiment against the troublemakers who had brought unwanted attention to their peaceful community. Gina's rumor campaign was particularly insidious. She'd already planted seeds about PTSD and dangerous military behavior, and now she was watering them with daily doses of manufactured evidence. The psychological impact of her campaign was carefully calculated. Gina understood that constant low-level harassment could be more effective than dramatic confrontation. Each violation notice was designed to create stress, uncertainty, and financial pressure. She'd space them irregularly, sometimes 3 in one day, then nothing for 2 days, then a surprise citation on the weekend. This unpredictable pattern kept us constantly on edge, never knowing when the next attack would come. It was psychological torture disguised as civic duty, and Gina executed it with the methodical precision of someone who'd perfected the art of making people's lives miserable while maintaining the appearance of legitimacy. The constant pressure was taking its toll on both of us, but especially on me. I wasn't sleeping, jumping at every sound, checking our locks obsessively like we were under siege. The financial anxiety was eating me alive. $850 had already accumulated, and if Gina kept up this pace, we'd owe thousands within weeks. "Kenny," I said one evening, staring at the latest batch of violation notices, "maybe we should just comply, pay the fines and keep our heads down. Maybe if we show we're willing to follow their rules, she'll leave us alone." But even as I said it, I knew how it sounded. Like surrender. Like letting the bully win. Kenny looked at me with something between disappointment and understanding. "You can choose to live in fear, Alex," she said quietly. "But I spent 8 years overseas defending our freedoms. I'm not about to surrender them to a suburban dictator." That night, as I lay awake listening to Gina's precisely timed music assault, I realized I was becoming exactly what she wanted. Broken, compliant, defeated. I felt like a prisoner in my own home. Afraid to step outside, afraid to make noise, afraid to exist normally in the space we'd worked so hard to afford. "Maybe she's right," I whispered to Kenny in the darkness. "Maybe we don't belong here. Maybe we should just move somewhere else, start over, find a place where we can live in peace." The words tasted like ashes in my mouth, but the constant stress was overwhelming. Gina Felix had turned her dream home into a war zone, and I was waving the white flag. But Kenny sat up in bed, her military training evident even in her posture. "Alex, I've faced insurgents who used actual weapons instead of HOA paperwork. I've commanded troops under enemy fire in real combat zones. I am not backing down from a neighborhood bully who thinks a clipboard makes her a general." The next morning, I watched Kenny open her laptop and create a new folder on her desktop. The name made me smile for the first time in days. Operation Neighborhood Peace. She began photographing everything. Gina's car parked illegally near fire hydrants. Her dog running off leash in violation of city ordinances. Her own violations of the noise restrictions she was using against us. Rule number 1 of warfare, Kenny explained as she documented Gina's hypocrisy with military precision. Know your enemy better than they know themselves. And Gina Felix is about to discover what real strategy looks like. But what was Kenny's real plan? What do you think Kenny discovered about Gina? Drop your theories below. Gina Felix arrived at the community center 30 minutes before the emergency HOA meeting was scheduled to begin, rolling in with the confidence of a general who'd already won the war. She set up in the front row with a briefcase full of what she called evidence, greeting each board member by name with a familiarity of someone who'd been manipulating them for years. Linda, Tom, Patricia, she said warmly, thank you for expediting this emergency session. I know how busy everyone is, but the situation has become absolutely untenable for our community. Her tone was measured, professional, reasonable, the voice of a concerned citizen, forced to take difficult action for the greater good. She'd clearly spent hours preparing for this moment, probably practicing her presentation in front of a mirror, until every gesture and inflection was perfect. What we're dealing with here, Gina began as more neighbors filed into the community center, is a clear case of systematic intimidation by individuals who believe military service gives them special privileges above community standards. It doesn't. She opened her briefcase with theatrical precision, revealing meticulously organized folders, printed photographs, and official-looking documents. The woman had turned harassment into an art form, complete with visual aids. Her evidence was impressive in its scope. Photos of our military truck positioned to look menacing. Time-stamped noise complaints that painted Kenny's morning workouts as deliberate disturbances. And witness statements from neighbors reporting feeling intimidated by our presence. Each document was professionally formatted, and each complaint was carefully worded to sound reasonable and measured rather than vindictive. The community center felt electric with tension as more residents filed in. I recognized faces from around the neighborhood. People I'd waved to but never properly met thanks to Gina's campaign of isolation. The Johnson family's former neighbors looked uncomfortable, probably remembering their own experiences with Gina's enforcement tactics. An elderly couple from the end of the street kept glancing nervously between Gina and us, clearly unsure what to believe. The atmosphere was thick with the kind of anticipation that precedes either vindication or disaster. Gina basked in the attention, occasionally nodding to supporters or adjusting her meticulously organized evidence display. Gina's presentation was a masterclass in manipulation disguised as civic duty. She spoke with the authority of someone who'd been protecting the community for years, her voice carrying just the right amount of regret and determination. I've given 12 years of my life to this neighborhood, she declared with the passion of a martyr. Protected property values, maintained community standards, and kept our families safe from exactly this kind of disruption. Now I'm being targeted, harassed, and threatened for doing my job, for standing up for the values that make Pinewood Drive the premier residential community it is today. Her voice cracked slightly on the word threatened, a nice touch that suggested genuine fear rather than vindictive rage. The woman should have been in politics. 25 neighbors had turned out for the meeting, the largest HOA gathering in years, and Gina had their complete attention. The emotional manipulation reached its peak as Gina built toward her dramatic conclusion. She gestured to her carefully prepared evidence packets, each violation meticulously documented with photos and timestamps. These individuals have shown complete contempt for our community standards, she continued, her voice gaining strength. They've used intimidation tactics. They've violated multiple HOA regulations, and they've created an atmosphere of fear among law-abiding residents. She paused for effect, scanning the room to ensure maximum impact. I request immediate enforcement of all outstanding violations and serious consideration of lease termination procedures for continued non-compliance with community standards. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. She wasn't just asking for fines or warnings. She wanted us gone, expelled from the neighborhood like some kind of suburban excommunication. Kenny and I slipped into the back of the room just as Gina concluded her opening salvo. Several board members were nodding sympathetically, clearly impressed by Gina's professional presentation and apparent documentation. She'd managed to frame herself as the victim, and us as the aggressors, despite being the one who'd called police on a decorated military officer for the crime of moving into her own home. When the board asked if we'd like to respond to the allegations, Kenny stood up with the calm authority of someone who'd briefed generals and senators. May I present some facts to counter these accusations? She asked politely. The room fell silent as she walked to the front, carrying nothing but a simple manila folder. The contrast with Gina's theatrical briefcase and poster boards was striking. Substance versus show. Mr. Felix has made serious accusations about our character and our compliance with community standards, Kenny began, her voice clear and steady. I believe in facts rather than emotions, in evidence rather than innuendo, so let me share some documented facts with this assembly. What happened next was like watching a precision airstrike destroy a house of cards. Kenny opened her folder and began systematically dismantling Gina's case with the methodical efficiency of a military briefing. Evidence Package 1, she announced, connecting her laptop to the room's projection system. Video documentation of actual rule violations. The first video showed Gina, clearly identifiable, dumping her household trash into our bin at 5:47 a.m. The timestamp was clear, the image quality perfect. Gasps rippled through the audience as they watched their self-appointed rule enforcer breaking the very regulations she claimed to protect. The demolition continued with ruthless efficiency. Evidence Package 2, Kenny continued, advancing to the next slide. Documentation fraud and witness manipulation. She displayed proof that Gina's multiple witness statements had come from exactly two people, both close personal friends who lived on Gina's street and had never actually witnessed the alleged incidents. She showed photographs of Gina's own property violations, her car parked blocking sidewalk access, her garden exceeding the same height limits she'd used against us, her unauthorized yard decorations that violated the signage policies she'd weaponized against our welcome banner. This noise complaint was filed at 6:15 a.m. for exercise sounds, Kenny said, displaying the document, but security footage from the base shows I was already at work. Mrs. Felix filed a false report. Evidence Package 3. Kenny Preston relentlessly. Systematic harassment and stalking behavior. Phone logs showed Gina had called Kenny's workplace 6 times in 2 weeks. 47 photographs were taken of our property from public areas. Records of Gina following Kenny during morning runs, documented through multiple neighbors' security camera footage. The room dynamic shifted like a tectonic plate movement. Whispers started in the back rows and spread forward like ripples in a pond. I didn't know she was taking pictures. 47 photos. That's basically stalking. No wonder the Johnson family moved away. Board members began asking pointed questions that Gina clearly hadn't prepared for. The shift in the room's energy was palpable as neighbors began to process what they were seeing. Whispered conversations started in the back rows, spreading forward like wildfire. I had no idea she was taking pictures of my house, too, murmured someone behind me. Remember when she filed that complaint about my fence? I thought it was legitimate, said another voice. The realization was dawning on the entire community that they'd been living under surveillance, that their self-appointed protector had been documenting their every move. Faces that had shown initial sympathy for Gina now displayed disgust and betrayal. The neighborhood dictator's empire was crumbling in real time. Mrs. Felix, can you explain why your complaints are processed within 24 hours while other residents wait 2 to 3 weeks? Evidence Package 4, Kenny concluded, delivering the killing blow. Financial manipulation and selective enforcement. She displayed a comprehensive comparison chart showing 18 violations issued to our household in 14 days, compared to 3 violations for the entire rest of the neighborhood during the same period. Processing times that revealed Gina's complaints received priority treatment unavailable to other residents. Phone records show Gina had contacted various city agencies 47 times in 2 weeks, attempting to weaponize municipal services against private citizens. Mrs. Felix, Kenny said, looking directly at Gina for the first time. You've accused us of believing we deserve special treatment because of military service, but your own documented behavior suggests you believe you deserve special treatment because of your HOA connections. Gina's desperation was beautiful to watch. She stood up abruptly, her professional facade cracking like cheap paint. This is character assassination, she shouted, her voice rising to the pitch that had terrorized the neighborhood for years. They're using military intimidation tactics. You can't trust anything they say. They've manipulated evidence. They've threatened witnesses. They've turned our peaceful community into a war zone. She actually tried to rush the projector as if destroying the evidence would make the truth disappear. I stepped forward to intercept her, and she swung wildly in my direction before being restrained by 2 board members. Ma'am, I said quietly, I think everyone can see who's really causing the disturbance here. The board's 10-minute deliberation felt like 10 hours. But when they returned, their decision was Patrick and comprehensive. All violations against Kenny and me were dismissed as frivolous and unsupported by evidence. Gina was fined $500 for systematic abuse of the community complaint system. She received an official warning about harassment behavior that would remain in her permanent HOA file. Most importantly, the board announced a new policy requiring corroborating evidence from unrelated sources for all future complaints. Effectively the Gina Felix rule, though they were too polite to call it that officially. Gina stormed out before the meeting officially ended, shouting threats about appeals and lawsuits and constitutional rights that she clearly didn't understand. But as she reached the parking lot, I heard her on the phone with someone, her voice carrying clearly in the evening air. "Yes, I need to file a complaint about HOA corruption and board manipulation." "What? You need my address for the follow-up investigation?" "It's 1247 Pinewood Drive." Her voice had lost its earlier authority and carried a note of nervousness that hadn't been there before. Who was she really calling? And why did she suddenly sound so uncertain? Do you think Gina's plan will backfire? Comment on what you think happens next. 2 weeks after the HOA meeting, life had settled into something resembling normally. Gina Felix had effectively vanished from public view. No more porch pacing, no more clipboard patrols, no more dramatic confrontations in the middle of the street. Her house remained shuttered, curtains drawn tight against the world that had rejected her authority. I was finally sleeping through the night again, and Kenny was enjoying her morning runs without a surveillance photographer documenting every step. Maybe she finally learned her lesson. Said hopefully one evening as we grilled burgers on our back deck. Maybe she realized she'd gone too far and decided to back down. But Kenny knew better. People like Gina Felix don't simply give up and fade away. They regroup, they adapt, and they find new angles of attack. Her military experience had taught her that the most dangerous enemy is the one who's learned from their mistakes. Saturday morning brought vindication of Kenny's suspicions in the form of a large moving truck rumbling down Pinewood Drive. It pulled up directly in front of 1245 Pinewood Drive, the house immediately next door to Gina's fortress of resentment. Kenny and I watched from our kitchen window as a young woman emerged from the truck's passenger seat, stretching and looking around with the easy confidence of someone starting a new chapter. She appeared to be in her early 30s, athletic and energetic, with the kind of genuine smile that made you want to introduce yourself. She waved at everyone she saw, immediately establishing herself as the friendly new neighbor Gina definitely was not. "Ruby Johnson," she introduced herself when she knocked on our door that afternoon. "Just moved in next door. Well, next door to that house there." She pointed toward Gina's place with casual indifference. Our conversation with Ruby was refreshingly normal after weeks of Jinan-juiced drama. "Heard there was some excitement recently?" she asked with the casual curiosity of someone who'd received the neighborhood gossip download. "Something about someone filing lots of complaints." Kenny and I exchanged glances, unsure how much to reveal to the new neighbor. "Just some misunderstandings with a community member," I said diplomatically. Ruby nodded with understanding. "Oh, I hate those types. You know, Karen personalities who think they run everything and make everyone else's life miserable because they're bored with their own." Her casual use of that term made us both laugh. Finally, someone who understood exactly what we'd been dealing with. Through Gina's front window, I could see curtains twitching as our neighborhood spies size up her new target. Gina's comeback campaign began exactly 1 week after Ruby's arrival. Following the same playbook she'd used against us, she approached Ruby with fake friendliness, introducing herself as the Community Standards Coordinator and offering to review some important guidelines for new residents. When the friendly approach failed to establish dominance, Gina shifted to her tried-and-true violation strategy. "Flowerbed extends 6 and beyond approved property line," read Ruby's first citation. "Vehicle parked 17 consecutive hours in the same location creates the appearance of abandonment," declared the second. "Music audible from adjacent property during quiet hours," stated the third, apparently referring to Ruby's habit of humming while gardening. Gina was recycling her greatest hits, confident that the same tactics that had terrorized other neighbors would work again. But Ruby's reactions were completely unlike anything Gina had encountered before. Instead of frustration or fear, Ruby seemed genuinely amused by each escalating violation notice. She took careful notes, photographed everything, and maintained that same friendly smile even when she caught Gina taking surveillance photos of her daily activities. When Gina let her dog defecate on Ruby's lawn and left without cleaning it, Ruby simply documented the incident and cleaned it up herself, waving cheerfully at Gina's window afterward. When Gina complained to the HOA about Ruby's suspicious late-night activity, she worked night shifts at the hospital. Ruby provided her work schedule and supervisor's contact information with professional efficiency. It was like watching someone play chess against someone who was still learning checkers. What struck me most about Ruby's approach was her complete lack of fear. Other neighbors had cowed under Gina's assault, moving away or simply enduring the harassment in silence. But Ruby treated each violation notice like an interesting puzzle to solve rather than a threat to fear. She'd photograph the citations with the same clinical detachment Ken used when documenting evidence, When Gina stood in her yard taking surveillance photos, Ruby would wave cheerfully and sometimes even pose, completely destroying the intimidation factor. It was psychological warfare in reverse. Instead of being the hunter, Gina had suddenly become the hunted. The revelation came on a peaceful Sunday afternoon as Ruby was watering her garden, and Gina was positioned at her usual surveillance post behind her living room curtains. Ruby's phone rang, and she answered on speaker, apparently unaware that her voice would carry clearly across the quiet neighborhood. "Hi, Dad," she said cheerfully, and I paused in my own yard work to listen. What followed was a conversation that would have been perfectly normal, except for who Ruby's father turned out to be. "How's the new place treating you?" asked a familiar male voice. "Great, very educational," Ruby replied with a slight smile in her voice. "Any issues with the neighbor we discussed?" The voice was definitely familiar, but I couldn't quite place it. "Oh yes, Gina Felix at 1247 Pinewood Drive, just like you described. She's been very active with her documentation and complaints." "Document everything for the official file," the voice continued. And now I was certain I recognized it. "I want a comprehensive report on her behavioral patterns." "Already on it, Dad," Ruby confirmed with professional efficiency. "Photos, timestamps, and violation notices she's filed. The harassment pattern is textbook. I specialize in community monitoring. Your training really paid off." There was pride in the older man's voice as he responded, "Good work. Your mother and I are proud of you for taking this assignment seriously." Then came the words that made Gina's teacup slip from her hands and crash to her floor. "Thanks, Chief Johnson." The same Chief Johnson who'd responded to Gina's fraudulent 911 call. The same Chief Johnson who'd told his officer to keep an eye on Felix. Ruby wasn't just a random new neighbor. She was a carefully placed monitoring system. Gina's reaction was visible even from our yard. Through her window, I could see her face go from its usual pink to stark white in a matter of seconds. Her legs seemed to give out as she caught herself against the window frame, the full implications of her situation crashing over her like a tsunami. She wasn't just dealing with an annoying neighbor anymore. She was under active surveillance by the daughter of the police chief she'd harassed with false reports. Every complaint she filed, every violation notice she generated, every act of petty tyranny would now be documented and reported directly to law enforcement. Ruby had noticed Gina watching and offered a cheerful wave toward the window, her smile taking on a distinctly professional quality. "Beautiful day, isn't it, Mrs. Felix?" she called out. "Perfect weather for community monitoring. Tell Mom I'll be home for dinner Tuesday." Ruby concluded her call. "Love you, Dad." As she hung up, she looked directly at Gina's window with that same friendly smile. But now there was something unmistakably official about it. The irony was absolutely delicious. Gina Felix, who'd made a career out of watching and reporting on others, was now being watched and reported on by someone with actual authority to act on the information. The woman who terrorized neighbors with threats of police involvement was now living next door to a police chief's daughter, whose job was apparently keeping her under observation. Gina had spent years weaponizing law enforcement against innocent neighbors, and now law enforcement was living right next door, watching her every move. The final scene played out exactly as it should have. The following weekend, our entire street came together for an impromptu barbecue. The first real community gathering in years. Everyone was invited, and everyone came except for one notably absent household. Children played in the street while adults shared food and stories, finally free to enjoy their neighborhood without fear of citation or harassment. Ruby quickly became the social center of the gathering, organizing games and introducing neighbors who'd been afraid to interact during Gina's reign of terror. I hung a new sign by our front garden. Pinewood Drive, peaceful community, established 2024. Through her closed curtains, Gina Felix watched the celebration of everything she'd tried to destroy, knowing that her every move was being monitored by the very authority she tried to weaponize against others. But as I looked toward the street, I noticed another moving truck pulling up to the house on Gina's other side. Who could be moving in now?